the series. You missed like the first, I said this last week, like 7 weeks of like how God made everything good. It was good. It was beautiful. Life as God intended it to be. And what we saw last week is sin entering the world. And so if it's creation, we emphasize how did God create everything? What's the essence of it? And then we're moving more into the chaos part of the life that we experience it now. The word Genesis literally means the beginnings. And what we're trying to do with this series is to allow it to help us to understand who God is, to understand who we are, and understand the world we find ourselves in. We talked about in the first few weeks that God is the creator. He made all things. He made them good. He made them beautiful. And he made all things to flourish. That he is sovereign. That's what's going on in Genesis 1 about the sun and the moon and the land and the waters. Like, no, there is a God who created all those things. He is reigning and ruling over all other gods. That he made us as image bearers of God. So even before we're marked by sin and shame and the things that we struggle with about ourselves, before that, you are an image bearer of God. You have dignity, you have value, you have worth because you're made in his image. We talked about how he made man and he made woman, and man and woman are both equal yet distinct and different, and he's called us to different things, and that should be celebrated. We saw the goodness of Sabbath and the goodness of work, family, marriage. God went through all of these different areas and talked about it was good, and it was good, and it was good. But we saw last week that in chapter 3, Adam and Eve listened to the voice of the deceiver. And sin enters the world, and it brought death. It brought spiritual death as they were cut off from God, as we'll see this week. It brought relational death as they hid from God and one another. They covered themselves. They responded to sin with shame. They wanted to hide. We talk about how we like to hide, how we respond to sin, and with shame we cover up, we blame, we make excuses. But the bigger deal we saw last week is that the good news of the gospel is not how we respond to sin, but how God responded to sin. That in the midst of the sin, in the midst of the rebellion, in their midst of turning from God, God pursues after him. He comes after them, and he provides for them. And so today what we see is the second part of that account. We see the implications of sin. We see the implications of rebellion against our Creator. Rebellion against the way that life is intended to be. And often, we looked at this section, verses 14 to 25, as just the consequence of sin, which in one sense it is. If you want to go deep into the theological things, we'll talk about God's covenants, and there's a covenant of works, and anytime there's a covenant or an agreement, there's blessing if you keep it, and there's curse if you don't. This would be the curse part. This would be their rebellion against God, and like, hey, this is what I said I was going to do, and this is what you're going to experience. And so we see all this. We see the consequences of sin. But it's also more than that. One of the things Tim Mackey of the Bible Project talks about is what you'll see in the book of Genesis is every once in a while there'll be a poem. And what he says these poems do is they kind of wrap up or explain what just happened. It ties everything that just happened in the story into like one poem, into one story. And he says that it raises it up to a cosmic level. So there's more than just what's going on with Adam and Eve. This is why we find the world that we live in. And he says it's a poem of lament. They're designed to name the realities of what ultimately happened because of Adam and Eve's sin. So this poem names the realities of what God said he would do. So one of the things that we need to see is like, this isn't just like God flying off the handle. He's like, oh, they sinned. I'm really mad now. I'm going to do all this stuff. No, what he's saying is like, hey, I said if you eat of it, you will surely die. And this is the death. This is what it is. And so they used an illustration is a fish is created to live in water, right? Our kids are super into fishing. If you just come around Cross Point for a little bit, especially those middle school kids, it's all about fishing. And so every once in a while you go fishing, and I wouldn't even say to the kids, when I go fishing, One of the reasons I don't like to go fishing, I don't like taking the fish off the hook, right? Just whatever. Call me what you will. I don't like that part, right? I feel like I'm going to get like cut by their teeth. I'm going to stab myself with the hook. They're just kind of slimy. They're gross. I just think it's going to end bad. And it usually does. And there is a greater fear that I get them off and I can't get the deck because I'm not good at fishing. The hook gets stuck way down there and you got to like rip it out and their guts come flying, right? I'm afraid I'm going to kill the poor little fish, right? Now, Dingo, who I don't see him here, but he's a fisherman, and he assured me, he's like, hey, it's kind of a circle of life sort of thing, and so like, really, if the fish dies, you throw it back in, and somebody's going to eat the fish anyway, so you're like, don't feel too bad about killing the fish. But he's like, I get where you're coming from, right? And so, but if you take the fish out of the water too long, what happens to it? It dies. It struggles. It's painful. That's what's going on here. God said, hey, if you rebel, if you turn from me, if you don't live the way that I created you to live, you will surely die. And so what has happened is because of their sin, they have been taken out of the environment they were created to live in. And they eventually die. But what's not going on here is that they're there and God's like, oh, they really messed up now. And he just like starts taking some sort of a spear and starts stabbing them. Like, it's not like God's like extra mad because of what they did. He's like, no, this is just what I said I would do. This is what I said would happen if you rebel against me, if you don't live according to the way that I created. And so the picture we see here is man and humanity is created for life in the garden, in the presence of God. And sin has these effects which are spelled out here. Again, it's not God being angry and flying off the handle. It's a song of sadness at what humanity has chosen when it listened to the voice of the serpent. It's a song of lament. It's a song of sorrow. Because God knows what humanity is in for. And so, my hope in this passage is to help us understand our conditions, what we actually experience because of the effects of sin that's in us, around us. It helps us understand, why is there so much conflict? Why is there so much evil in the world? Why in our relationships is there sort of a battle for control? Whether it's in your marriage or with your kids. Why is there frustration with work? God created work as a good thing, as a life-giving thing. But it's sort of melded with frustration. Why is that? This passage helps us better understand our conditions. But also what I want us to see is that there's this, what Kent Hughes called a thread of grace that runs throughout the whole narrative. That we see God's grace, we see God's compassion, we see God's mercy in the midst of man's rebellion, in the midst of our turning from him. And finally, we'll see what God has done for us, what God has done about our sin, and how we live as new creations in light of what God has done. How do we live in this world of frustration, in this world of toil, in this world of pain, in this world of suffering? And so we want to understand our conditions, see God's grace in it and what he has done, and then how we can respond and live. It starts with our conditions. We see it in verses 14 to 19, our conditions as a result of sin. And Kent Hughes called it, we see God's mitigating grace. I had to look up the word mitigating, but I just liked it. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? To mitigate something is to make it less severe, to make it less painful. Tim Mackey said that God couldn't even bring about death without wanting to give hope of life in the midst of the death that we deserve. And so the first thing we see in our conditions, we see God's judgment of sin. And we see the cursing of the serpent. We see the pain of sin for the woman. We see the pain of sin for the man. But again, all of it's sort of laced with grace. And he starts with the serpent. Verse 14 says, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field. It says, on your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. He says, cursed are you. If there is a blessing, and everything that we've seen in all of chapters 1 and 2 has been God's blessing. God had blessed everything he had made. He created and it said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. He blessed them, and he made them in his image. And so it was life with God and life as God intended. And so if blessing is how God is life is supposed to be, Mackie called cursing as an inversion of blessing. And so if blessing is being fruitful, multiplying, filling, doing what God created you to do, you know when life just kind of goes right? It goes well? It's that. It's a flourishing that Genesis 1 and 2 talks about. But what we see with this curse results in conflict. It results in difficulty. It results in scarcity. If it's supposed to be fruitful, multiply, fill, the curse has brought conflict and difficulty and scarcity. And we need to notice that he doesn't curse the man and the woman. He curses the snake and the ground. He never fully removes his blessing from them. But he's removed his blessing from the serpent. And he says, on your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. What he's driving at there is not like snakes used to have legs and now they don't. Snakes have always been that way. But what he's saying is that you've moved from a position of honor to dishonor. You've been defeated. It's a posture of humiliation. It's looking ahead to what God promises for him. You'll be defeated, and you're going to go about your life as a defeated foe. And in the end, you'll be humiliated. And so he curses the serpent, and he says, there'll be enmity, there'll be a battle, there'll be a war between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. This is this sort of thread of grace that we begin to see. What they're saying is that there would be an individual who would engage the serpent in a war, in combat, and win. It's pointing forward to Jesus, who would come and crush the head of the serpent. He would defeat him. When if Satan robs us of life, right? He brings conflict, he brings difficulty, he brings scarcity. He doesn't allow us to live the way that we're intended to live, okay? So I probably shared the story before. We moved it. I've talked to you guys about how I like good grass. And so we moved in this house, our last house in Orlando, and it had this great yard. The male person called it the jungle, because these people used to just buy plants and just plant them. And like, I found all these trees and stuff. And they literally had like price tags on them, and they were just kind of everywhere. So we had to like scrap the whole thing. But my cousin and I took all the good stuff, and we kind of made these flower beds and things like that. And then I found this guy that it was the same price as St. Augustine grass, but it was like zoysia. It was like good grass. And so he was impossible to get a hold of, but I'm like, I'm willing to fight this battle. I know he'll show up at some point and do it if I just kind of keep tracking him down, and I can get it for the same price as the St. Augustine, which is really just like overgrown weeds that kind of hurt your feet, and it's terrible. So anyway, we redo this whole backyard. He grows it. We have this great grass back there. Karina's mom bought us a swing set, a play set. My mom knew I'm terrible at putting things together, so my mom paid people to come put it together, because she's like, why should Karina suffer with Brian like spending a month trying to put this thing together? And it might also hurt our grandkids. So we have this great swing set. We have this awesome grass. We have this backyard that like we loved. And then there was this snake that just lived there. And he lived right underneath the swing set and like was not fazed by people. It was just like you'd be there and be like walk around and there's a little old snake. And I'm like, dude, go somewhere. I very much dislike snakes. So when we moved in, these people also had these concrete blocks everywhere. We had hundreds and hundreds of these concrete kind of like blocks that were for like drainage and stuff. So one day I'm like, all right, so I'm sorry for animal rights people. I know there's good snakes and they eat the mice, blah, blah, whatever, right? The snake was keeping our kids from going in the backyard and using this place. Like, nobody would go outside. So I'm going on a run. I take this block, and I just drop it on its head. I crush the head of the serpent, right? I'm like, it's biblical. We can do this. I am so scared of snakes. I took a picture of it to see how it was positioned. I went for a full-on run, and then I came back and made sure that it was still in the same position to make sure it was like dead. And then I like took something and put it in a bucket with that. So, and then what happened when the snake was gone? Everybody went outside. Everybody played. Everybody lived life as it was intended to be in our backyard. That's what God is saying is going to happen. There is one that is robbing you of life. Jesus comes and he crushes his head, right? He kills him, throws him away, and then you get to move on and live life the way it's intended to be. That's where this whole story is going. That's why he's already talking about that now. He's saying, I am going to crush its head. I am going to destroy it. I am going to kill it. And you can live life as they intended. We still miss the backyard. It was great. It had string lights, this big oak tree. It was wondrous, right? And life was lived. It was beautiful. There is one that is trying to destroy your life. He's trying to destroy my life. And God said, like, I will crush him. I have crushed him. That's what I did on the cross. I destroyed Satan. I destroyed sin. I destroyed death. Sure, he can bruise your heel. He's going to make your life a little bit of a pain. You know when you like hit your heel, you hurt your foot, and everything becomes kind of awkward. I got this little thing, like a callus on my foot. It kind of feels like I'm stepping on Legos all the time as I'm walking. It's annoying, but it doesn't stop anything. It doesn't stop me, right? He's saying, I will crush his head. I will destroy him. And that's what he does to the serpent. And then he moves on to the woman and says, hey, there is forgiveness, but there will be pain because of what you have done. He says to the woman, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. It says, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. And so what God does is the implications of sin kind of drive at where both the man and the woman can tend to find their identity. Again, Jamie, who is the pastor at our sending church, he's like, hey, this is just a broad brush stroke, but in general, women find their identity. They're called to care for and nurture the home and relational and relationships, and men, with the big brush strokes, are called to provide and protect. They're supposed to be guardians and cultivators of the garden. And what we see with the implications, the conditions, the result of sin is they are going to have pain, they're going to have struggle, they're going to find grief in these areas that they're primarily called. He says there's going to be pain in childbearing. I was just talking to somebody on the way in. They're not talking about like just the pain of when you have a child. It's talking about the pain in pursuing to even have children. And you see this throughout the scriptures. You see it with Sarah. You see it all the way to Mary. Just the conditions of having children. There'll be pain. And then it's child rearing. It's in the raising of your children. There's going to be pain. There's going to be toil. It's a word that's associated with grief. Maybe you've experienced this as a parent. I just saw some old friends that are here I haven't seen them since, we've seen them, but haven't seen kind of our kids since they were in pre-K. Like, I love our kids. Our kids are awesome. Let me do all the things about how enjoyable they are. Parenting causes grief. It causes worry. It causes you to stay up at night. You think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and they're going to result in this. Like, we read Proverbs a lot. Like, hey, it's kind of formulaic. If I do this, my kids will turn into this. And then that's where the Bible Project guys actually talk about, that's why you need the book of Ecclesiastes, which is like, okay, you can do all the right things, but still often it doesn't go that way. It doesn't just result. It's not a formula that you can just hit and it happens. We've read all the books. We do all the things, right? And people will say it, but I'll affirm it. Like, our kids are not perfect. There is grief. There is struggle. There is hardship. There is difficulty in that. In the midst of all the joy and all the good things. Then he moves on and says, your desire shall be contrary to your husband. He shall rule over you. What he's driving at here is control. He's saying in your relationship, in your marriage, there's going to be a battle for control. You're going to want to control your husband, and your husband's going to want to dominate and control you. Free today? That's why it's hard, right? You both want control. You want things to go the way that you want them to go. You want your husband to do things the way that you want him to do them. And he wants to do things the way that he wants to do them. And those are often different. Sometimes it's not even bad. It's like, hey, we just do that. They're different. Derek Kidner says, to love and to cherish becomes to desire and to dominate. There was one of these kind of self-help gurus, girl, what was her name? Mel Robbins. And this was fascinating. It's really bad advice, but there's some truth to it. And she talks about, I guess she wrote a book on it, and she's making money, so that's why there is this podcast and everything else. But it was, she calls it the let 'em theory. And what she's talking about is if, like, your kids want to do something stupid, just let them. If your friend wants to do something stupid, just let them, right? Over and over again, just let them, just let them, just let them. He's like, why are you trying to control everybody? Okay? Don't let your kids do whatever they want. I'm just going to start with the advice. But what was fascinating to me about this whole thing, and she's got all her caveats to it, but this let 'em theory, what shocked me was the popularity of it. She posted a little thing on Instagram, and by the next week, she had hundreds of thousands of likes. Why? Because people relate to it, because they have a desire to what? Control. We want to control everybody. We want to control everything. We want to control in our relationships. We want to control our world. We want to control our workplaces. We want to control. That's why it resonated, because they're like, hey, how do I not have to have all this grief from controlling everything? This is not like a affirmation of that book. It's probably not helpful at all, but just in general, it drives at what's going on. That everybody relates this idea of we want control. Kidner says, while even pagan marriages can rise far above this, he said the pull of sin is always towards it. The propensity of our hearts, the propensity of our lives is to drift back to wanting to control. To control people, to control our world, to control our life. And it has to be a battle. It has to be a fight away from it and against it. All right, let's move on to the man. He uses the same word, this idea of pain and toil, but he says to Adam, who's got a longer sort of punishment, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain, that's the same word, in toil and pain with grief, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. He says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. He wasn't even living in South Florida, and he knew it. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. He says, man, guys, your pain, your toil is going to come through work, through provision. Kent Hughes says, anyone who works to produce in this world knows pain and frustration. This idea of pursuit of work and vocation and provision is going to be a struggle. And we respond to this struggle in two different ways. And I usually teeter-totter back and forth on these things. One, we become really lazy. And we push off the hard work. This was what I can do. I can have the tendency, let me just gather some more information for the sermon, as opposed to sitting down do the hard work of processing through it mentally and thinking through it and praying for it. That's a lot harder than just reading a bunch of books. How does this apply to me? How does this apply to our context? How do I get that? So I can tend to want to avoid that, right? We have one of our children who has figured out kind of what assignments are easier and which ones are harder, and we'll bypass the harder ones. They're harder. We get way ahead in all the other work, but not do the harder things. So it can result in laziness. We see this in Proverbs chapter 24. Verse 30, it says, I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense. And behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. Sound familiar? The ground was covered with nettles or thistles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. It says that we can have the propensity towards laziness, towards not wanting to do the hard things. So that's one way we respond to the pain, the toil of work. Another response is that we're all consumed by it. We can't stop. We can't shut it off, right? This is what can happen. I'll push things off, and it's like, oh, I got to get that done. We're going to do it. And we don't get it done in the time that we're supposed to get it done. And it starts creeping and pushing into everything else. We live in a 24/7 time where you can do work anywhere, at any time. And it just sort of is always with us. Then we get all consumed, and some of us just can't stop working. And it's sin. It's not letting God be God. I talked about how there's these threads of grace, or how it's all laced with grace. One of the beauties that we see in this passage is that God uses our struggle to do multiple things. But one thing that he's doing when he gives us the pain in childbearing, the pain in family, or the pain in work, he is allowing us to see and understand that we can't find our ultimate identity in the things that we often try to find our ultimate identity in. Men can try to find their identity in what they've done, what they have accomplished, what they built, their work. Women can tend to find their identity in how good of a mom I am. Am I married? Am I not married? Am I doing all these things? How are my kids? Right? God's like, hey, that's a terrible place to find your identity. Don't try and find your identity, and I'm going to make it such a frustration that you'll never want to find your identity in it. So it reminds us of where to find our ultimate identity. I had a friend that was struggling with some work things this week, and I was texting kind of back and forth with them, and I was like, hey, I'm not solving this problem via text, and I don't want this to come across as very shallow. But I know this has been a struggle. I know this has been toil. I know this has been difficult. But one thing that I'm actually studying this week is that God uses the toil, God uses the struggle, God uses the difficulty to do two things. One, to draw you closer to him. God will use whatever your pain is to draw us closer to him. What's the C.S. Lewis famous saying that God whispers to us in our pleasures and shouts through it to us through our pain? He uses it to draw us closer to him. And the other thing that you'll see is that it will lead you to dependence on him. People rarely turn to God when everything is perfect. Correct? Maybe sometimes we get to a point of like, oh man, this is awesome. Thanks, God. No, usually we're like, oh no, look, it's awesome. Look what I did. Right? And we get puffed up and we get arrogant. God uses all sorts of things, all sorts of difficulties, all sorts of struggles to draw us and allow us to have dependence on him. He'll take everything away from you. Why? Because he loves you. And he wants you to find your dependence and identity in him. And so if life is a pain and life is toil and life is grief, it's an opportunity to draw closer to him and depend on him. And so these are the conditions for the serpent, you're defeated, for the woman, for the man. And we see this thread of grace throughout. Walter Brueggemann said, the sentence is life apart from the goodness of God. Life in conflict that's filled with pain, with sweat, and most interestingly, I can't say it, with the distortion of desire. But is nonetheless life when death is clearly indicated. There is grace that comes through. There is life that we see. When the facts warrant death, God insists on life for his creatures. This is what Adam will see. There is a thread of life that goes on through this curse of death. And what the author is doing, what Moses is doing, is showing us what we need the most. D.A. Carson put it this way. He says, Genesis 3 shows us what we most need. It says, if you're a Marxist, what you need are revolutionaries and decent economists, right? If we could just fix everything politically, we just need more revolutionaries, we need economists, we need to just figure it all out, and then everything will be fine. He says, if you're a psychologist, what you need is an army of counselors. Like, let's just get to the root of the problem, let's fix it, let's just figure it out. We need counselors. He says, if you think the root of all malfunction and disorder is medical, what you really need are endless numbers of Mayo clinics, right? If it's just a medical thing, that's why there's all sorts of centers for anti-aging and life. It's like everywhere. He says, but if our first and foremost serious need is to be reconciled to God, a God now stands over against us, who pronounces death upon us because of our willfully chosen rebellion. He says, then what we need the most, though we may have all these other derivative needs, so he's not saying medical help's bad, or therapy's bad, or government is bad. He says we have all these derivative needs, but what we need the most is to be reconciled to God. We need somebody to save us. The message of the Bible isn't just cleaning yourself up or getting everything fixed or everything in the right order. The message of the Bible is God coming to rescue us, God coming to save us, God coming to take us out of death and bring us new life. And that's what we see in verses 20 to 24. We see what God did. We see God's covering. If he kind of mitigated with his grace, he saves us with grace. And we see it in verse 20. It says, the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. It's fascinating. If you just look at your Bible, in verse 19, it says, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. He's saying, you're going to die. I said, if you sin, if you turn from me, it will lead to death. And he said, that's still going to happen. What does Adam name his wife? Eve. It literally means life giver. He says, because she was the mother of all living. Adam stares at these conditions, the punishment, and what does he get? What does he glean from them? Oh, God's going to do something about this. He had eyes to see God's goodness, God's promise, God's grace. He had ears to hear God's promise of grace in the midst of words of judgment. D.A. Carson called the naming of Eve, which means life giver, as an expression of faith. At the core, Adam trusted God. He put his faith in him that he could bring life out of death. That's what he was doing. He's like, God's doing something more here. There was I think it's a parenting book, correct? Elise Fitzpatrick, Glimpses of Grace. She talks about just having glimpses of grace. To be able to see light in the midst of darkness. That's what we need to train our eyes to see. When we live in a world of darkness, when there's a lot of darkness in us, it's easy to see the darkness in us, isn't it? Like when we're on, like even we took a little awkward 30 seconds to have a little time of reflection, right? It's easy to say like, oh, confess your sin. Like, okay, let me just start naming the list. I was like, great, I need a little more time, right? It's easy to see darkness. But what Adam does is he sees light. He's like, God is at work. God is doing something. God is working. He has eyes of faith. And Adam trusted God. How do we know that Adam trusted God? He named Eve life in the middle of a world of death. The call is we need to put our faith in God, to put our trust in God, that he can take us from where we are and fulfill the promises he has for us. The second thing that we see of God's saving grace is God covered their shame with something that was very costly. Verse 21 says, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins, and he clothed them. They had already covered themselves with fig leaves. Had to be uncomfortable, right? So they had covered themselves, but it just wasn't enough. It wasn't there. And so God covers them. They had so much shame that they couldn't hide. God didn't just say like, hey, why don't you just start over, guys? Why don't you just try again? Like, lose the fig leaves, come back together. That's not what he does. He's like, no, you have sin. You have shame. It needs to be covered. Your fig leaves, like your excuses, your blame, you're trying to make yourself look good, it's not going to work. You need me. God knows they needed to be covered. And we don't have a time to do a whole theology, but he set in motion this idea of sacrifice. And he killed an animal, and he covered them. And it's all a pointer, is all looking ahead to Jesus, who comes and he destroys Satan. He destroys the one who holds people in their sin, holds people in their shame, holds people in their guilt. And Jesus himself is crushed. He becomes the sacrifice. And he bears our sin. And he bears our shame. And he bears our guilt. And he covers us. Jesus crushes the serpent's head by taking our guilt, by taking our shame on himself. Isaiah 53 says he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was a chastisement that brought us peace. By his wounds we are healed. So Christianity isn't about cleaning yourself up, covering yourself up, making yourself look good. Christianity is about trusting that God has provided covering for you. That's why we read the prayer together. Jesus comes on the scene and John the Baptist says, behold, the Lamb of God who what? Takes away the sins of the world. Jesus covers us. We can bring our sin and our shame to him because he's paid the price for it. And the last way we see God's covering or God's grace is he casts them out, which doesn't seem very much like grace. But look at verse 22 to 24. It says, then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and he also take of the tree in life and live forever. And then he kind of like just stops talking. It says, therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he has taken. It says he drove the man out at the east of the Garden of Eden. He placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. This is somewhat confusing, so I'll just read this quote that makes it very clear. But we can see God's grace in casting Adam and Eve out of the garden. Kent Hughes says it was an act of protection, not just punishment. So there was a punishment in casting them out. He's like, hey, you can't live here anymore. But by banishing them, God prevented them from eating from the tree of life and living forever in their sinful state, separated from him. If they would have stayed in the garden, they would have continually lived in their sin. They would have continually lived in their shame. There would have been nothing to cover them. He says this banishing also set in motion God's plan of redemption, of reconciling us back to God through the sacrificing of his son and restoring of all things. So their banishing was punishment, but it also protected them, that they didn't continually live in their sin, and it set forth this plan of redemption. And it was through their exile that God makes a way for us to come back home. It sets in motion what Jesus came to do, to bring us back into the presence of God. It says there's this cherubim, this angel that had these swords to keep them out. And if you read Exodus 36, it talks about the tabernacle, and it talks about making this curtain. It was a purple curtain, and it was blue, but on the curtain there was what? There's cherubim. There was angels, right? And it kept people away from the presence of God. It protected and guarded the Holy of Holies, because if we went into it, we would surely die because we're not holy. And then what happens when Jesus is on the cross? What happens to the curtain? It says it's ripped, it's torn into two, allowing us to what? Go into the presence of God, to go back home. That's why they had to be banished. That's why they had to be punished so that one could come to bring us home. And so we see God's grace throughout this. Adam has faith. God covers their shame, and he casts them out to bring them home. And so how do we respond? Are we doing all time? Yep, let's end. How do we respond? The first thing you do is repent. Jamie says, the call is to put your trust in the snake crusher. There's this picture in Numbers 21, and there's this camp, and God's people are out in the wilderness, and then there's these venomous snakes that get let loose in the camp, and they start biting people, and people start dying. And God tells Moses to get a staff, get a symbol, and he puts a what? He puts a serpent on it. And he says, everybody, hey, as long as you look at that serpent, as long as you look at that staff, you'll be healed. You'll be restored. You'll have life. He's saying, fix your eyes on Moses. Fix your eyes on this staff. That's the call of faith. God's like, hey, don't sit there and try and kill all the serpents. Look to the one who killed them. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. Put your faith in him. Put your trust in him, and you will live. Anyone who looked at the staff was healed. The call is for us to look at Jesus. It's not about cleaning yourself up, not covering yourself up to look good. It's about fixing your eyes on the one who covered our shame, who heals. And that's the second part. We need to remember your shame has been covered. Whatever, even in a quick 30 seconds of like, hey, what sin do you have to confess? Whatever the worst things you do, God said, hey, that's been covered. What we see here is God doing for the couple what they couldn't do for themselves. We saw this last week. Don't hide your shame. Bring it to God. Let him actually heal your shame. Deal with it. Deal with it once and for all. And the third thing we need to do is that we need to know our role. There's this weird thing in Romans chapter 16. It says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. As a follower of Christ, you're part of his people. You're a part of his body. And so Jesus has come into the world to destroy Satan, destroy sin, to destroy evil. And he uses us. We have a role in bringing peace. So in a world of violence, bring love. In a world of disorder, bring order. In a world of hate and violence and wickedness, bring the peace of Christ. Bring the love of Christ. Bring the truth of Christ. Bring the grace of Christ that you have received. God's using us. God's using you to reconcile the world back to himself. Do we not live in a world of violence? Is there not evil everywhere? Is there not brokenness in relationships? Is there not challenges in your workplaces? God is sending us to be light, to bring salt, to bring life into this world.